I'm recording this from a Marriott in Anchorage. Room 514. The heat is on, the curtains are drawn, and I can hear water running in the pipes behind the wall. I've been hearing it for 3 days. The front desk says there's nothing wrong with the plumbing. I believe them. I just wish it would stop. I don't know exactly who I'm writing this for. I gave my statement to the Coast Guard. I gave a longer one to the 2 NOAA officials who flew in from Juneau. I gave an even longer one to the people who didn't tell me which agency they were from but had government IDs and a portable air filtration unit in the room where we talked. I told all of them everything. They wrote it down, asked follow-up questions, and thanked me for my cooperation. None of them told me anything back. So I'm writing this down because I need someone outside of that chain to understand what happened, and more importantly, what's going to happen next. Because I don't think they're moving fast enough. I don't think they can. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 4 seasons working as a deckhand on commercial fishing trawlers out of Dutch Harbor, Alaska, which is technically a town called Unalaska on an island in the Aleutian chain, and if you've ever watched those reality shows about crab fishing, you have a rough idea of where I've been living 5 months out of every year. What you don't have is the feel of it. Television gives you the waves and the shouting. It doesn't give you the way the cold sits inside your bones like a second skeleton, or the sound the hull makes at night when the current pushes from a direction the captain didn't expect. You get used to these things. You have to, or you go home after the first trip. I got used to them. I wish I hadn't, because getting used to discomfort is what made me stay long enough to be on the Kellen Marie the day we pulled up that net. The Kellen Marie was a 124-foot stern trawler, named after the owner's granddaughter. A working vessel, nothing pretty about it. She'd been retrofitted twice, and if you looked at the welds in the fish hold you could see 3 decades of improvisation. Our crew was 6, Captain Ray Harkness, who'd been running boats in the Bering since before I was born, Tina Svensson, our deck boss, whose family had been fishing out of Alaska for 3 generations and who had exactly 0 patience for complaints about weather, Viktor Reznikov, the most experienced deckhand I'd ever worked with, a guy who could splice cable in 30-knot winds without looking down, Danny Callahan, 2nd season, 23 years old, still at the stage where he thought the job was an adventure rather than a grind, Marcus Webb, our engineer, who kept the Kellen Marie's diesels running through conditions that should have killed them, and me. We were a good crew. Not friends exactly, you don't always become friends on a boat, despite what television tells you, but competent together. We knew each other's rhythms. We'd survived bad weather, mechanical failures, and one genuinely ugly incident with a tangled net that almost pulled Victor over the stern rail. We trusted each other in the way that people trust each other when trust is a working condition rather than a feeling. It was February. Deep season. We'd been running pollock trawls about 60 nautical miles northwest of Dutch Harbor in a zone that the company had been working for years. Standard bottom trawling, you drag the net, you haul it up, you sort the catch, you pack it, you do it again. The weather had been ugly but manageable, which in the Bering Sea means the waves were only 15 feet and the wind was only screaming instead of trying to kill you. We'd been at it for 9 days without any issues worth mentioning. On the 10th day, around 4 in the morning, we set a trawl in a spot that the GPS said was productive but that Ray said felt wrong. I remember that because Ray never talked about feelings. He talked about charts and sonar returns and ice reports. But that morning he stood at the wheelhouse window with his coffee and said, "Bottom looks funny here," and then set the trawl anyway because we were behind quota and the company was asking questions. The net went down to about 300 meters, which was deep for that area. Normally we were working at 150, 200. The sonar showed a shelf dropping off, and the trawl followed it down. We let it drag for 90 minutes, which was standard, and when we started the hull back, the winch labored. Heavy net. That happens. Sometimes you hit a pocket. Sometimes you snag bottom structure and drag up rocks and mud along with the fish. We compensated, adjusted the winch speed, and brought it up. The net broke the surface at 5:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was logging it, and because everything in my life divides into before and after that moment. It was heavy. Too heavy for Pollock, even a good hull. The crane strained as we swung it over the stern and opened the cod end over the sorting table. Fish poured out, Pollock, some cod, a few rockfish. Normal bycatch ratios. But the net kept dumping, and what came out after the fish was not fish. It was a mass. Dark, dense, roughly the size of a truck engine, and it hit the sorting table with a wet, heavy sound that was wrong in a way I can't fully explain. Not a thud, not a splash. Something between organic and structural, like dropping a waterlogged mattress full of gravel. The mass was dark brownish gray, and at first I thought it was a chunk of seafloor, some kind of compacted sediment or coral aggregate. Then I saw it move. Not all of it. Portions of it. Small undulations across the surface, like the skin of something breathing. Tina was closest. She took a step back and said, "What the hell is that?" without any inflection, the way you say something when you're not really asking a question, you're just processing. The mass sat in a pile of fish and it moved in sections, rippling, and I realized it wasn't one thing. It was a colony. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of individual organisms packed so tightly they'd formed a single structure. They were each about the size of my thumb. Tubular, segmented, pale where they weren't coated in silt. They had no visible eyes. They had cilia, fine, hair-like structures along their bodies that moved in coordinated waves. And they were wrapped around something solid at the center of the mass, a piece of metal. Corroded, encrusted, but recognizably manufactured. A cylinder, maybe 2 feet long, with seams and what looked like a mounting bracket. Soviet-era equipment, Victor said later. Probably an instrument package from a research buoy, fallen off its mooring decades ago and sitting on the bottom collecting whatever these things were. The organisms were moving away from the mass, spreading outward across the sorting table like a slow spill. They moved toward the fish. Toward anything warm. I could see them orienting, the cilia on their bodies all tilting the same direction, and the direction was always toward the nearest heat source. When a dying pollock twitched on the table, a dozen of them changed course toward it simultaneously. Danny reached for one. He wasn't being stupid, he was being 23 and curious and used to handling weird things that came up in nets. He picked one up bare-handed before Tina could tell him not to, turned it over, said, "It's warm," and set it down. By the time he set it down, there was a red mark on his palm where the thing's cilia had scraped him. Not a deep wound. A graze. He wiped it on his rain gear and didn't think about it again for several hours. Victor wasn't as lucky. He was trying to clear the net, which was tangled around the metal cylinder, and a section of the mass shifted and fell against his forearm. He was wearing his deck gloves, but the cuff of his jacket had ridden up, and the organisms pressed against about 4 inches of bare skin. He jerked back, swore in Russian, and shook them off. 3 or 4 of them had attached briefly, and where they'd been, his skin had a line of small abrasions, like shallow cuts made with a very precise blade. Clean. Almost surgical. They barely bled. Ray came down from the wheelhouse when Tina radioed up. He looked at the mass on the sorting table, looked at the organism spreading across the deck toward the scuppers, looked at Victor's arm and Danny's hand, and said, "Get all of that off my boat." 45 minutes later, we'd shoveled, hosed, and scraped every visible trace of the colony off the deck and over the side. The metal cylinder went too. The sorting table was bleached. The deck was bleached. Victor's cuts were cleaned and bandaged. Danny's scrape was washed with iodine. I thought that was the end of it. We all did. Ray logged the incident, radioed Dutch Harbor to report an unusual catch for the record, and we went back to work. The next trawl came up clean. Normal pollock. Normal volume. The ocean does strange things, you deal with it and move on. That's the job. 6 hours later, Victor came to me in the galley and held out his arm. The bandage was off. The cuts were closed, which should have been a good sign. But they weren't closed the way cuts close. There was no scabbing, no redness, no inflammation. The skin had simply sealed. Smoothly. Like it had never been broken. And for about an inch around each former cut, the texture of his skin had changed. It was denser. Slightly off color, not bruised, not discolored exactly, but as if the skin had thickened and become more opaque. When I touched it, he asked me to, he wanted someone else to feel it, it was cool. Not cold. Cool, the way a countertop is cool. The rest of his arm was normal body temperature. That patch wasn't. It doesn't hurt, Victor said. His voice was steady but his eyes weren't. It should hurt. There should be swelling. There's nothing. I told him to show the captain. He said he already had. Ray had radioed the company's shoreside medical contact, described the symptoms, and been told to keep the wounds clean and monitor. Standard protocol for a boat that was 3 days from port. There was nothing else to do out here. I went and found Danny. His palm looked the same. The scrape was gone. Replaced by a smooth patch of that same dense, cool skin. He kept pressing his other thumb into it, like he was testing a piece of fruit. I can feel pressure, he said, but not temperature. I put my hand on the stove rail and I couldn't tell if it was hot. He laughed when he said it. He was 23. That night, I went out on deck to check the scuppers. We'd bleached them. I'd personally run hot water through every drain channel on the working deck. The scuppers were clean. Visually, they were clean. But when I knelt down and ran my fingers along the inside of the channels, I felt it. A film. Thin, almost imperceptible, with a texture like wet silk. And when I pressed into it, I felt it press back. Not resistance. Response. A faint contraction, like muscle fiber reacting to stimulus. I bleached the scuppers again. I ran near boiling water from the engine room through them. When I checked an hour later, the film was back. Thinner. Adapted. But present. I told Tina. She checked and confirmed it. She told Ray. Ray told us to stay off the deck in bare skin, keep our gloves on, and don't touch our faces. He doubled the radio schedule with Dutch Harbor. We were 3 days out. The best thing to do was get back to port. So that's what we did. Those 3 days were the worst of my life up to that point. I've revised that ranking since. Victor's changes accelerated on the second day. The patches of altered skin expanded outward from the wound sites, moving down his forearm at a rate you could almost track by the hour. By the morning of day 2, the skin from his wrist to his elbow was that same dense, cool material. It wasn't painful. He kept saying that. It didn't hurt. If anything, he said, the arm felt strong. More functional. He demonstrated by gripping a cable and pulling, one-handed, with force that made Marcus stop what he was doing and stare. His eyes started changing that afternoon. The sclera, the whites, developed a faint cloudiness. Not cataracts. A membrane. Thin, bluish, translucent. Victor stood at the bow rail in a freezing crosswind and told me that the glare off the water didn't bother him anymore. He said the membrane seemed to filter light. He said he could see things in the water he'd never been able to see before, movement patterns, depth layers, thermal gradients made visible. He described it calmly, factually, and that calm was the thing that scared me most. Victor was a man who cursed and worried and complained like any sane person. He was not a man who described his own body's transformation with clinical detachment. The detachment wasn't peace. I understood that even then. It was his nervous system being rewritten, his threat response being dialed down by something that didn't want him to resist. Danny's hands were worse. The skin had changed all the way to his wrists. Between his fingers, where the webs of skin connect at the base, the webbing had extended. Slightly. Maybe a quarter-inch beyond where it should have been. And his fingers, when he spread them, spread wider than any human hand should, the joints showing flexibility that was new and wrong. He was quieter than Victor. He sat in the galley and stared at his hands and didn't say much. When Marcus asked him if he was okay, he said, "I can feel the ocean through the hull." He said it the way you tell someone you had a headache. On the third morning, I went into the fish hold to check on the catch we'd packed before the bad trawl. The hold was refrigerated, kept just above freezing. Standard. I opened the hatch and the smell hit me, not rot, not decay, but something mineral and briny, like low tide concentrated. The fish were packed in ice in the totes, same as always. But on the surface of the ice, and on the skin of the fish, there was a film. The same film from the scuppers. It was on everything. Every tote, every fish, every surface. The organisms, or their offspring, or their spores, or whatever it was they shed, had gotten into the hold through the drainage system. The channels connected the deck to the hold. I'd bleached the deck but I hadn't thought about the hold. Nobody had. I told Ray. He sealed the hold. We had 30,000 pounds of pollock in there, plus bycatch. Contracted. Expected. Worth money that the crew and the company needed. Ray sealed it without hesitation. That's the kind of man he was. Whatever was happening, whatever those things were, it wasn't going into Dutch Harbor through his catch. He'd take the financial hit. He'd explain it to the company. Except the hold wasn't the only path. We docked in Dutch Harbor on a Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., gray sky, 32 degrees, light snow. There were people on the dock waiting for us, a harbor medic, a representative from the fishing company, a Coast Guard officer who was there as a formality for the unusual catch report Ray had filed. Standard. Small-town bureaucracy doing its job. Victor and Danny walked off the boat under their own power. Victor was wearing long sleeves and sunglasses. Danny had his hands in his pockets. They didn't look dramatically wrong. Not to someone who wasn't looking. The medic took them to the clinic in a truck. I stayed on the boat with Tina and Marcus while Ray dealt with the company rep and the Coast Guard officer. I showed Tina the hold. She looked at the film on the fish, looked at me, and said 3 words, "The processing plant." I felt something drop inside my chest. The Kellen Marie sold its catch to Unisea, one of the major processing operations in Dutch Harbor. Standard arrangement. When we came in with pollock, it went from our hold to their plant, where it was sorted, filleted, flash frozen, and packed into shipping containers for distribution to the lower 48. Turnaround was fast. In peak season, fish went from boat to freezer container in under 12 hours. We had sealed our hold. Our fish weren't going anywhere. But we were not the only boat that had been working those waters. 3 other trawlers from the same company had been running in overlapping zones. I didn't know if they'd hit the same colony we did. I didn't know if there were other colonies. I didn't know if the organisms could spread through open water. Through fish-to-fish contact, through the food chain itself. What I knew was that the film was alive, it was in our hold, and our hold's drainage connected to the same seawater systems that every trawler in the fleet used. I told Ray. Ray called the company. I went to the processing plant myself. I want to be clear about what happened next, because in every version of this story I could tell, this is where I come off as either a hero or a lunatic, and the truth is I was neither. I was a deckhand with engine grease under my fingernails and a high school education who had seen something he couldn't explain, and I was trying to do the only thing that made sense, which was to tell people before it was too late. I walked into the Unisea plant's receiving office and asked to speak with whoever managed incoming product. A supervisor named Linda came out. I told her that the Kellen Marie's catch was contaminated, that it should not be processed, and that she should check fish from any other vessel that had been trawling in our zone. She listened. She was professional. She told me that the company had already flagged our catch as held pending inspection, that it wasn't going into the line, and that she appreciated me coming in. Then I asked about the other boats. The Pacific Valor had come in 2 days before us. The Renata K had come in the day before. Both had been working in adjacent zones. Their catches had already been processed, filleted, frozen, packed, and loaded into refrigerated shipping containers. Some of those containers were still on the dock. Others had already been loaded onto the weekly supply barge to Anchorage and the bi-weekly cargo run to Seattle. I asked Linda if I could see the fish from those boats. She said no, they were already in containers. I asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual about them, a film, a smell, anything. She said no. I asked if I could speak with the processing line workers who had handled that fish. She told me, politely, that I was a deckhand from a different boat and that this wasn't really my lane, and that if I had concerns I should take them to the Coast Guard or the company. I went to the Coast Guard station. I filed a supplemental report. The officer on duty was the same one from the dock that morning. He listened, took notes, and said he'd forward my concerns to the district office in Juneau. I asked how long that would take. He said the system worked at the speed it worked. I called the NOAA Fisheries Office in Dutch Harbor directly. A biologist named Dr. Carla Espinoza took my call. She was the first person who asked the right questions. She asked about the organism's response to temperature. She asked about their reproductive behavior. She asked specifically about the film and whether it was present on surfaces that had been chemically treated. When I told her about the bleach, that I'd bleached the scuppers and the film came back thinner but present, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me to come in. I spent 3 hours with Dr. Espinoza. She took my account in detail. She asked me to draw the organisms from memory. She asked about the metal cylinder and whether I'd noticed any markings. She asked about Victor and Danny, the progression, the timeline, the specific changes. She took notes in a way that told me she was not humoring me. When I finished, she made a phone call in Russian, which surprised me, and then she made 3 more calls in English. By the time I left her office, she had requested an emergency inspection of the Kellen Marie's hold, a temporary processing halt at UniSea pending biological review, and a consult with a deep-sea biology team at the University of Washington. For about 4 hours, I felt like the system was working. I went to the clinic to see Victor and Danny. The clinic in Dutch Harbor is small, a few beds, basic equipment, staffed by a physician's assistant and a rotating doctor from the Indian Health Service. They were not equipped for what was in their building. Danny was in the first bed. His hands were out of his pockets now, and I could see them clearly. The webbing between his fingers had extended to the first knuckle. His skin from the wrists down had the same dense, cool texture as the patches on Victor's arm, but further along, it had a faint translucency now, and beneath it I could see his blood vessels, but they were wrong. Too organized. Too geometric. Like a circuit board instead of the random branching of normal vasculature. He was sitting up, alert, responsive. He answered the doctor's questions. He said he could feel water, not see it, not hear it, feel it, moving through the pipes in the walls. He described the direction of flow and the approximate volume. The doctor tested this by turning a faucet on and off in the next room without telling Danny. Danny reported the change in real time. His accuracy was perfect. Victor was in a back room. They'd put him there because looking at him upset the other patients. The changes had reached his face. The skin across his cheekbones and forehead had that same altered quality, dense, smooth, faintly iridescent under the fluorescent lights. The membrane over his eyes was thicker now. His pupils had changed shape, elongated horizontally, like a goat's or a cuttlefish's. He was breathing normally, but when the doctor put a pulse oximeter on his finger, the reading was wrong. His blood oxygen was 97%, which is normal, but his heart rate was 38. An athlete might hit the low 40s. Victor was not an athlete. He was a 46-year-old man who smoked and his heart was beating 38 times a minute and he said he felt fine. The doctor, Her name was Reyes, and I want her to get credit for this because she handled it better than anyone. Dr. Reyes told me that she'd taken tissue samples from both men and sent them to the regional hospital in Anchorage by charter plane that morning. She said that based on her examination, the organisms weren't infecting Victor and Danny in any conventional sense. They weren't causing an immune response because the body wasn't recognizing them as foreign. They were integrating at the cellular level, replacing human tissue with functional analogs that operated on different biological parameters. She used a phrase I haven't forgotten: it's not killing them. It's renovating them. Renovating them for what? I asked. She said she didn't know. But the tissue changes she was seeing, the increased density, the cold tolerance, the pressure-adapted vascular restructuring, were consistent with adaptations for a deep-water, high-pressure environment. Whatever these organisms had evolved to do, they were doing it to human tissue now. Converting it. Optimizing it for conditions that existed 1,000 meters below the ocean surface. On land, in air, at normal atmospheric pressure, Victor and Danny were becoming something that didn't belong here. Not dying. Becoming. I left the clinic and went back to the dock. It was dark by then, maybe 7 p.m., and the dock lights were on, orange sodium vapor cutting through snow that had picked up since morning. I could see the UniSea plant from where I stood. The lights were on. The plant was running. Dr. Espinoza had requested a processing halt. But requests go through channels, and channels take time, and the plant had contracts and quotas and a workforce of 200 people who got paid by the shift. I watched a forklift carry a pallet of frozen fish boxes from the plant floor to the loading dock. I watched a reefer container get sealed and hoisted onto a truck chassis. I watched the truck drive toward the port's cargo staging area, where containers were loaded onto barges and ships for transport south. I called Espinoza. She didn't answer. I called the Coast Guard. The officer told me the inspection was scheduled for the following morning. I told him the plant was still running. He told me he understood my concern but that he couldn't shut down a private commercial operation without authorization from the district commander, and the district commander was in Juneau, and it was 7 p.m. I stood on the dock in the snow and I did the math. The Pacific Valor's catch had been processed 2 days ago. Call it 40,000 pounds of pollock. Filleted, frozen, packed. At Unisia's throughput rate, that's roughly 4 standard reefer containers. 2 were on the dock. 2 had shipped on yesterday's barge to Anchorage. The Renata K's catch, another 35,000 pounds, maybe, had been processed the day before. Those containers were already on a cargo vessel scheduled for Seattle. 75,000 pounds of fish, processed and distributed, from boats that had been working in the same waters where we pulled up the colony. I didn't know if those fish were contaminated. I didn't have proof. But I'd seen the film in our hold, and our hold's drainage ran on seawater, and every boat in the fleet used the same seawater, and the organisms we'd pulled up had been living in that water, and if they could colonize our scuppers through drainage backflow then they could colonize anything that the ocean touched. I went back to the Kellen Marie. Marcus was in the engine room doing post-trip maintenance. Tina was in the galley. I told them what I'd learned. Tina sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked if the organisms could survive commercial flash freezing. I thought about the film on our scuppers. The Bering Sea in February is 34 degrees. The organisms lived in it. They'd evolved at the bottom of it, in near freezing water, under crushing pressure, in total darkness. Commercial freezing took fish down to -20 Fahrenheit. Cold, yes. But these things were born in cold. Cold was their medium. Cold was where they worked. I don't know, I said. Yes you do, Tina said. The next morning, the inspection happened. Dr. Espinoza and a Coast Guard team boarded the Kellen Marie and opened the hold. The film was extensive. Every surface, every fish, every tote. Espinoza took samples. Within an hour, she'd confirmed that the organisms in our hold were reproductively active and that the film was a biofilm, a colonial structure that functioned as a single distributed organism. She described it as sessile reproductive architecture. She said it was the most efficient biological colonization strategy she'd ever seen. The processing halt went into effect at noon. UniC shut down the Pollock line. 2 hours later, 2 plant workers went to the clinic with symptoms. A woman named Patrice, who worked the filleting line, had smooth, dense patches on both forearms where the fish slime had routinely soaked through her gloves. A man named Gao, who worked the packing station, had it on his hands. Same presentation as Danny's early stage. Cool skin. No pain. Altered texture. Patrice and Gao had never been on the Kellen Marie. They had never touched the original colony. They had handled fish from the Pacific Valor's catch, fish that had been processed through the same equipment, in the same plant, using the same water supply. The organisms were already in the processing infrastructure. They were in the wash water. They were in the drainage. They were on the conveyor belts and the sorting tables and the filleting stations. They were everywhere the fish had been. By the evening, Dutch Harbor felt different. Word had spread the way it does in a small town, not through official channels but through people talking at the bar, at the store, at the harbor. The clinic had 4 patients now. Victor, Danny, Patrice, Gao. Espinosa's team was working around the clock. The Coast Guard had escalated to the district command, and someone had made a call to someone else, because by 9 p.m. there was a C-130 on the runway at the airport with a team from the CDC's Emergency Response Division and a microbiologist from NOAA's Deep Ocean Research Program. They set up in the community center. They were professional, efficient, and visibly shaken by what they found at the clinic. Victor had progressed further. His skin from the waist up had completed the conversion. It had a pearlescent quality now, blue-gray, smooth, with that faint translucency that let you see the restructured vasculature beneath. His body temperature had dropped to 89 degrees. He should have been hypothermic. He was doing push-ups on the clinic floor when the CDC team arrived because he said his body wanted to move and he didn't know how else to satisfy the urge. He was doing them one-handed. With the arm that had been cut 9 days ago. The quarantine went into effect the following day. Coast Guard cutters established a security zone around the harbor. Flights were restricted. The processing plant was sealed. Everyone who had worked the Pollock line in the past week was screened. Of the roughly 60 people who had direct contact with fish from the Pacific Valor or Renata K catches, 11 showed early-stage skin changes. All were moved to an isolation ward set up in the school gymnasium. I cooperated with everything. Every interview, every timeline reconstruction, every question about what the colony looked like and how the organisms moved and what temperature the deck was when we hosed it down. I answered everything because I believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that the system was working. The right people were here. The quarantine was holding. Nobody in town who hadn't had direct contact with contaminated fish was showing symptoms. Containment was possible. Containment was happening. Dr. Espinosa was the one who broke it. Not intentionally. She was sitting in the community center at 2 in the morning, 3 days after the quarantine started, and I'd brought her coffee because I couldn't sleep and I didn't know what else to do with myself. She was on her laptop, tracking something. I sat down across from her and she looked up and her face had the expression of someone who's been doing arithmetic they hoped would come out differently. The shipping containers, she said. I know, I said. The ones that left before the quarantine. 6 containers, she said. 2 to Anchorage by barge. 4 to Seattle on the cargo run. The Anchorage containers were unloaded at the port facility and transferred to a regional distribution warehouse. From there, product was repackaged and sent to grocery distribution centers in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. The Seattle containers went to a cold storage facility in Tacoma. From Tacoma, Product was distributed to retail chains in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. She said it like she was reading a shipping manifest. She was. It was on her screen. "That's frozen pollock fillets from the Pacific Valor and Renata K," she said. "Processed at UniC before the halt. Between 70 and 80,000 pounds, retail packed, brand labeled, sent into the commercial food supply chain." She paused. "A recall was issued yesterday. Voluntary. The company agreed to it. But it's frozen fish. People buy it and put it in their freezers. They don't check recall lists. They eat it when they eat it." "Cooking would kill the organisms," I said, because I needed her to tell me that. She didn't tell me that. She picked up a printout from the table and handed it to me. It was a lab report from the tissue samples she'd sent to the University of Washington. I'm not a scientist, but I could read the summary. The organism's cellular structure was stable at temperatures ranging from -40 to +30 degrees Celsius. At temperatures above 60 degrees, roughly the internal temperature of cooked fish, the organisms themselves died. But their reproductive material, Espinosa called them propagules, I had to ask her to spell it, the propagules survived to 95 degrees Celsius. Boiling point is 100. "Most people don't cook frozen fish to boiling," she said. "They bake it," I said. 375. Maybe 400. Oven temperature isn't internal temperature. People undercook fish. They like it moist." She took the printout back. "And the propagules don't need to be ingested to be viable. They can colonize through skin contact with contaminated surfaces. Cutting boards. Sinks. Drain traps." She looked at me and she was not calm. Dr. Carla Espinosa, who had been the most composed person in every room I'd seen her in for the past 4 days, was not calm. "The organisms evolved to colonize new environments through water systems. That's what they do. That's what the biofilm is, an infrastructure for spreading through any connected water pathway. A kitchen sink connected to a municipal water line is not fundamentally different from a tidal pool connected to the ocean. It's plumbing. They don't care about our categories." I asked her what was being done. She said the CDC had issued an alert to state health departments in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California. The recall was being upgraded from voluntary to mandatory. Retail chains were being notified. It was happening. The system was responding. How long for a mandatory recall to actually pull product from shelves? I asked. 72 hours on the fast end. A week or more in practice. And that's shelves. Product already in people's homes. She didn't finish. I asked about the water. If the propagules went down a kitchen drain, into municipal water treatment, could they survive that? "Municipal water treatment uses chlorination," she said. "Chlorine kills the adult organisms. We confirmed that." "The propagules," she stopped. Took a breath. "We haven't finished testing the propagules against chlorine at municipal treatment concentrations. The tests take time. We should have results in 48 hours. What's your guess?" I said. "I don't guess. Carla." She looked at me. "The adult organisms survived your deck bleach. Bleach is sodium hypochlorite. Municipal water treatment uses chlorine compounds at lower concentrations than deck bleach. I don't guess, but I can do that arithmetic." I went outside. It was snowing. I stood on the steps of the community center and looked at the harbor, where the Coast Guard cutter sat with its lights on, enforcing a quarantine on a town that was already safe because the thing we were quarantining against had left 6 days ago in a refrigerated shipping container on a scheduled cargo run, following the same route it always followed, because that's how supply chains work. The system hadn't failed. The system was doing exactly what the system does. Product moves from point of origin to point of sale through a network of refrigerated transportation and storage infrastructure, and it does this efficiently, and it does this fast, and the thing that was in our fish had ridden that network the way a virus rides a sneeze, not because the network was broken, but because the network was working perfectly. The next 3 days in Dutch Harbor were strange. The quarantine held. No new cases in town. The 11 plant workers in isolation were stable, changing, yes, progressing through stages that the medical team was documenting with the grim fascination of people writing a textbook no one ever wanted, but stable. Victor had been transferred off island by the military. I didn't see him go. I was told he was being taken to a facility with better equipment. Danny was still at the clinic. I visited him once. He asked me to open the window. It was 19 degrees outside and snowing. I opened it. He stood in front of it and breathed the cold air, and his altered skin seemed to drink it in. I don't know how else to describe what I saw. The texture of his skin shifted in the cold, became smoother, more fluid, more alive. He looked at me with those changed eyes and said, "It's not what you think." I asked him what he meant. He said, "It doesn't want anything. It's just doing what it does. Like weather." I closed the window when I left. On the 4th day of the quarantine, Espinosa got a call. Then another. Then she was on 3 calls simultaneously, and then she was packing a bag, and then she was on the C-130 to Anchorage without saying goodbye to anyone. I got the information from the Coast Guard officer, the same one from the dock, who by now knew me well enough to skip the official language. 3 cases in Anchorage. A family of 3. They'd bought frozen pollock from a Safeway 2 days before the recall hit. Cooked it at home. Dad and 1 kid had eaten it. Mom had handled the raw fish while preparing it, rinsed the cutting board in the sink, didn't eat any herself. All 3 were symptomatic. Dad and the kid had GI involvement, the organisms had colonized the digestive tract and were working outward. Mom had it on her hands. Same presentation as Danny's early stage. She'd handled the fish and then washed her hands in the sink, and the propagules had gotten into the cuts around her fingernails, the small, invisible abrasions that every human hand carries. 2 more cases in Juneau the same day. An elderly man who'd eaten the fish. A grocery store employee who'd restocked the freezer section. Then Seattle. 4 cases, then 7, then 11. Not all connected to the fish. 2 of the Seattle cases were plumbers. They'd been called to a residence where the kitchen drain was backing up. When they opened the trap, it was full of a pale, fibrous growth. Biofilm. In the pipes. They'd handled it barehanded because they thought it was a standard organic clog. By the time they went to the ER with skin changes on their hands, the biofilm had been in that home's plumbing for an estimated 5 days. A plumbing system connected to a municipal water main. Espinosa's arithmetic. I was put on a chartered flight to Anchorage 2 days later. Not because I was sick, I'd been tested repeatedly and showed no signs of exposure. Somehow, through luck or timing or the fact that I'd been wearing gloves when everyone else wasn't, I hadn't been colonized. They wanted me in Anchorage for further debriefing. More interviews. More timeline reconstruction. A different set of officials with different IDs asking the same questions. I'm in the Marriott now. Room 514. I've been here for 3 days. I've been told I'm free to go. I haven't gone. I don't know where I'd go. My apartment is in Dutch Harbor, which is still under quarantine. My family is in Spokane, and Spokane is in Washington State, and Washington State has 43 confirmed cases as of the last number I was given, which was yesterday afternoon, and the number will be different now. I did the right thing. I want that on the record. I identified the threat. I reported it through every channel available to me. I pushed when people didn't listen. I cooperated when they did. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I did what a reasonable person should do when they encounter something dangerous and unprecedented, which is to tell the people whose job it is to handle it and then help them handle it. And they did their jobs. The Coast Guard did its job. NOAA did its job. The CDC did its job. Every single person in that chain acted professionally, competently, and with appropriate urgency. It wasn't enough. Not because anyone failed. Because the thing that came up in our net on February 10th had been alive at the bottom of the Bering Sea for longer than our supply chain, longer than our institutions, longer than our species. It didn't need to be smart. It didn't need to be malicious. It didn't need to want anything. It just needed to enter a system that moved biological material from one water source to another, and we had built that system for it, perfected it, optimized it, and connected it to every kitchen sink and shower drain and municipal water treatment plant in the western United States. Danny was wrong about one thing. He said it was like weather. It's not. Weather is a system. This is a passenger in a system. Our system. The one we can't turn off because we need it to live. The news is on. I keep it on now. There was a segment this morning, local Anchorage broadcast, about a cluster of unusual dermatological cases in a suburb of Portland. The reporter described the symptoms: smooth, dense patches of skin, altered pigmentation, cold tolerance. 3 patients at a walk-in clinic. The reporter said health authorities were investigating a possible environmental cause. She said it was not believed to be contagious and that there was no cause for public alarm. She doesn't know what I know. She will. I turned the TV off after that. I sat on the bed and listened to the water in the pipes behind the wall. It's always running in hotels. You don't notice until you do, and then you can't stop. Water in the pipes, water in the walls, water running to the sink and the shower and the toilet, connected to the building's main, connected to the city's main, connected to the treatment plant, connected to the watershed, connected to everything. I got up and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the faucet. The water came out clear. Normal pressure, normal temperature. I let it run over my hands. I've done this 4 times today. I wash my hands and I watch the water and I tell myself it's fine. It's treated. It's municipal. It's monitored. Today it's fine. I don't know about tomorrow's water. I don't know whose pipes it's been through. I don't know what's living in the infrastructure between the treatment plant and my faucet, in the dark, in the cold, in the joints and the elbows and the dead-end mains where the water sits still and the chlorine concentration drops and things that evolved in the deepest water on Earth find conditions that are close enough. I turned the faucet off. I dried my hands. I looked at them. Normal skin. Normal color. Normal warmth. I looked at them for a long time.